Before I tell you my story, imagine this. The person who gave you life, the one whose voice shaped your first memories, points at you in front of strangers and says you were never their child. That moment doesn't just break you, it erases you. Stay with me, because what happened next will show how far betrayal can go, and how a daughter fights to reclaim her own name. The courtroom was cold, though I could not tell if it was the air conditioning or the chill in my veins. I sat there, my palms sweating, my heart hammering so loudly I thought the entire room could hear it. My eyes locked on her, my mother, or the woman who had raised me, fed me, sang me lullabies in the dark nights of my childhood. She stood tall, her gray hair pinned back, her face carved with lines I knew by heart. And then it happened. She lifted her hand, pointed directly at me, and her voice rang out steady, merciless. That woman is not my daughter. She never was. The words cut through me sharper than any blade. The walls seemed to close in, the murmurs of the spectators swelling like waves crashing against my skull. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I would faint. I had braced myself for harsh words, for disappointment, but not this. Not erasure. To be denied by the very person who had given me life was to be cast into a void where even my own blood turned against me. I wanted to scream, to stand and shout, "How dare you? I am your daughter. I remember your voice when you prayed at night. I remember the smell of your bread baking on Sundays. I remember you holding my hand when I had a fever at 7 years old." But the words never left my lips. My voice was trapped, strangled by shock. The judge's gavel struck, demanding order. The murmurs quieted, but inside me chaos raged. I turned my eyes to her, searching for something. Hesitation, a flicker of doubt, a shadow of love. But there was nothing. Her eyes were cold, stranger's eyes. As I sat there, my mind tumbled back through the years, searching desperately for the moment when the ground beneath us had cracked, for the betrayal that had led us to this frozen battlefield where she denied me. I remembered the sacrifices I had made, the endless years of carrying the weight of this family on my back, believing that one day she would look at me with pride. And now, here I was, treated like an impostor in my own life story. The smell of polished wood and ink filled my nose, grounding me in the present even as my memories dragged me backward. I remembered 1998, when I worked 2 jobs to pay off her debts after she had guaranteed a loan for my uncle. I was only 20, exhausted, but I told myself that this was what daughters did. I didn't ask for gratitude. I didn't ask for recognition. All I wanted was to belong. I remembered 2005, when she fell ill and I stayed at her bedside for months, spoon-feeding her soup, changing her sheets, whispering encouragement in her ear even when she could barely open her eyes. I thought those moments had sealed a bond between us, unbreakable, stronger than anything. How could she now stand here and erase me with a single sentence? The defense attorney's voice echoed, "Mrs. Silva, are you certain of your statement?" And she, without trembling, answered, "Absolutely. I have no daughter by that name." Gasps filled the room. My body went numb. I was no longer sure if I was alive or simply a ghost watching her own trial. The faces around me blurred, but I could feel their eyes on me, doubtful, curious, some even disgusted, as if I were a fraud caught sneaking into someone else's family, someone else's life. And in that moment, I realized the cruelest betrayal isn't when strangers question your worth. It's when the very hands that once lifted you from the ground push you down into the dirt, and the very voice that once called you my child declares you a stranger. The gavel struck again. My fate was no longer in my hands. It rested in the shadows of her denial, and I felt myself slipping, piece by piece, into the abyss she had carved with her words. When the gavel echoed and the courtroom fell back into silence, I felt as though my life had shattered into fragments, each piece scattering beyond my reach. I sat motionless, my body present but my soul elsewhere. My mother's words, "She is not my daughter," repeated in my head like a cruel refrain, each echo heavier than the last. I had heard lies before, I had been betrayed before, but nothing compared to this. Because this wasn't just rejection. This was annihilation. I stared at her across the room, and for a fleeting second, I searched her face for cracks. A twitch of her lips, a tremor in her hand, anything to suggest hesitation. But she was steady. Her posture was straight, her tone unwavering, as if she had rehearsed this denial 100 times in the mirror. As if stripping me of my identity was something she had prepared for and chosen willingly. My lawyer leaned in, whispering, "Stay calm. We'll challenge her testimony." But how does one challenge the testimony of a mother? Documents could be forged, witnesses could be bribed, but a mother's voice carried an authority that pierced deeper than evidence. If she said I was no one, the world believed it. And in that moment, I believed it too. Memories rose unbidden, flooding me with the contrast between then and now. I remembered being 6 years old, walking barefoot on the cool tiles of our small house, my mother humming softly in the kitchen while beans simmered on the stove. I remembered the way she brushed my hair before school, pulling too hard on the tangles but kissing my head afterward. I remembered birthdays when she scraped money together to buy me a second-hand doll, wrapping it in newspaper so I could tear it open and smile. Those memories screamed at me now, desperate proof that I had not imagined her love. But what did they mean, if today she erased me with a single sentence? The years of sacrifice weighed on me as I sat there. In 2010, when I was drowning in debt after university, I refused better job offers abroad because she begged me not to leave her alone. "I need you here," she had whispered. So I stayed. I worked long hours in an office that drained my soul, all because I wanted her to feel secure. I thought loyalty mattered. I thought she understood. In 2013, when she wanted to renovate her crumbling kitchen, I gave her nearly all my savings. 15,000 rias I had been collecting slowly, coin by coin. I remember her smile as the new tiles were laid, the fresh paint covering years of neglect. She hugged me and said, "You are my blessing." And now, in this courtroom, she had turned that blessing into a curse, as if my very existence was a theft. The manipulation revealed itself clearly in hindsight. She had always known how to pull my strings. A sigh, a tear, a story of helplessness, and I would give everything. She molded me to believe that love meant sacrifice, that my worth came from how much I could carry for others. And I carried it all. Bills, responsibilities, her disappointments, her loneliness. I bore it without complaint, thinking it was the sacred bond between mother and daughter. But perhaps that bond had been one-sided all along. Perhaps I was nothing more than her shield when she needed protection, her purse when she needed money, her comfort when she felt abandoned. And now that the trial placed her in the spotlight, she chose the easiest path, to discard me, to call me an impostor, to preserve her image at the cost of my existence. The judge's voice broke through my thoughts. "We will resume after recess." The courtroom stirred as people stood and whispered, some casting glances at me as if I were a spectacle. I stayed seated, numb, unable to move. My lawyer placed a hand on my arm. "You're stronger than this. Don't let her words undo you." Stronger? I wasn't sure strength had any meaning anymore. What strength remains when the one who gave you life denies that you belong to it? As the benches emptied and the doors opened, I caught my mother's gaze once more. She didn't look away. Her eyes met mine, cold and resolute. And in that moment, I realized something devastating. She wasn't lying because she was confused. She wasn't mistaken. She was choosing this, choosing to erase me. And I was left wondering, was I blind all those years? Or had she always been capable of this cruelty, waiting only for the right stage to reveal it? During recess, I couldn't stand up at first. The bench felt like winter stone, the varnish sticky under my palms. People flowed around me, heels ticking, papers rustling, a bailiff's keys chiming like a small, cruel bell. I forced myself to breathe through the antiseptic courtroom smell and walked into the corridor where the fluorescent lights hummed like bees trapped in glass. My tongue tasted of copper. I leaned against the wall and slid my fingertips over the seam in the plaster until the shaking in my hands found something to hold. I thought of São Paulo, 2012, Rua Augusta in the rain. When I ran 3 waitressing shifts in 2 restaurants and a bakery just to keep up with her rent after she forgot to pay for 3 months. I sent $200 on a Tuesday, $800 on Friday, then another $600 the next week, telling myself I was building a bridge back to her heart. In 2015, when the dentist said she needed a root canal and crowns, I handed over my card. $7,350 parceled in 12 payments that hollowed my salary like termites in wood. She cried, hugged me, whispered, "Você é minha vida." You are my life. I wore those words like a medal. Now they hung like a counterfeit around my neck. My lawyer, Enrique, blue tie, tired eyes that had seen too many families devour themselves, passed me a bottle of water. "She's coordinated," he said softly. "This isn't spontaneous." He glanced down the corridor. "Someone is advising her." I knew who. My brother. Not by blood, she always said. Just a boy I helped raise. But in practice, the king she preferred. In 2018, when the old house in Villa Mariana finally changed hands after years of probate, she called me with a trembling voice. "Filha, I need you to sign a simple power of attorney so I can resolve the tax issue." I was in Pinheiros that day, grease on my apron, heat from the pizza oven burning my face. "Send it," I said. She mailed papers. I signed, trusting the weight of 30 years of lullabies. Weeks later, the deed moved. Not to her, not to both of us, but to him. Market value, $620,000. My name disappeared like chalk in rain. When I confronted her, she said, "He will take care of me when I'm old. You're strong. You don't need it." Love repackaged as dispossession. A mother's sentence carved into a ledger. Now the ledger had become a witness stand. The corridor door clicked. She stepped out, escorted by the man I used to call my brother. He wore a navy blazer he couldn't afford without the house we lost. He leaned in, whispering. She nodded, eyes forward, that stiff, righteous posture. I remembered her hands kneading dough on Sundays, the soft sigh she made when steam fogged the kitchen window. I remembered her slippers scraping down the hallway when I had a fever at 13, the cool cloth on my forehead, her voice counting softly. 1, 2, 3, breathe. The sweetness of those memories rubbed raw against the sight of her now, turning a daughter into a defendant with a sentence and a finger. She saw me. For a heartbeat, her mouth softened, the ghost of my mother flickering behind the mask. Then she straightened. "Stop making scenes," she said in a low voice. "You brought this on yourself." "How?" The word left me before I could dress it in dignity. "By paying your rent? By signing what you asked? By choosing you over every version of my life that could have been?" Her gaze slid past me to the window, where the city glittered indifferent. "You never listened." That was her blade, recasting obedience as rebellion, turning my yeses into accusations. My brother put a hand on her elbow, a small, proprietary touch, and steered her away. Their footsteps receded over the tiles, a metronome counting down to my erasure. Back in the courtroom, the air felt thinner. Enrique opened his folder and laid out the anchors of my existence. Birth certificate from 1988 stamped at Hospital Santa Helena. Photos of a first-grade recital, me with glue in my hair and her clapping in the front row. A 2005 clinic admission form where she signed Mother Guardian in rushed blue ink. WhatsApp transfers, a parade of $150, $300, $1. $0, attached to captions like light bill, gas, just until Friday, Filha. Proof, yes, but also a history of how love becomes logistics until there is nothing left but receipts. Opposing counsel stood, smooth as a gleaming door. "Your Honor, we contest the authenticity of these documents and the circumstances under which they were produced. Mrs. Silva has reason to believe the defendant has pursued her for financial gain under false pretenses." I almost laughed. False pretenses. As if my entire body had not been built from the ash of my pretenses to survive. Then, the impossible request arrived, wearing an old date. Enrique slid a sealed envelope onto the table. "We subpoenaed the 2018 power of attorney records," he said. "They arrived at 10:07 a.m. He broke the seal, and the smell of paper and ink rose like a memory of school. He spread the copies between us. The text was clinical, unemotional. I, undersigned, authorize. Then the dagger. An additional clause tucked on page 3. Smaller font. A summer insect hiding under a leaf. Beneficiary substitution at grantor's discretion. Binding and irrevocable. The notary stamp bled blue like a bruise. I didn't sign this, I whispered. Henrique traced the initials in the margin. My initials. Tilted slightly right like they always had been since I learned to sign leaning over cafe counters. It's a scan of the original. We'll request the in-person log. If the notary was dirty, we'll find it. I stared at my own name printed next to a clause that hollowed it. Memory struck with a hissing sound. July 23, 2018. I was at the post office before a double shift, sweat trickling down my shoulder blades, her voice on speaker. It's nothing, Kirita. Just a formality. There's a line, I'm old, help me. I signed in a hurry, inhaling the smell of damp cardboard and cheap ink, a stranger's cough rattling behind me. Impossible request disguised as routine mercy. The day moved on. My life moved out. The judge returned. Seats creaked. My mother took the stand again, rosary tucked in her purse like an alibi. Mrs. Silva, Henrique said, voice steady. Did you ask the defendant to sign a power of attorney concerning the Villa Mariana property in 2018? She folded her hands. I did not understand those documents. I am a simple woman. She turned her head, eyes shining damp. She pushed me. She always pushed me. The lie landed with the soft weight of a confession. A murmur stirred. I tasted bitterness, like burned coffee. Henrique nodded, as if he'd expected the pivot. Your Honor, we will call the notary's clerk and present the transaction log. We will also submit bank records of transfers from the defendant to Mrs. Silva from 2010 to 2022, totaling $86,940. This establishes a pattern of support inconsistent with the claim that the defendant is an impostor. Numbers steadied me. The ledger could be cruel, but it could also testify. The years lined up inside my head like mile markers. 2010, $550 for her refrigerator. 2014, $3,200 for cataract surgery deposit. 2017, $9,000 when the landlord threatened eviction. 2020, $4,600 for the funeral of an aunt who had never remembered my birthday but remembered to call me when the bill came. Each transfer a bead on a sorrowful rosary I had prayed to the wrong shrine. Then came the unexpected turn. Opposing counsel, confident as Sundays, called their last-minute witness. A woman in a floral dress, mid-50s, clutching a purse like a secret. She sat, eyes fixed on a point just above the judge's shoulder. Name? Camilla Rocha. Relation? She hesitated. I was a nurse at Hospital Santa Helena in 1988. I worked in maternity. The courtroom air sharpened. I recognize Mrs. Silva, she said, nodding at my mother. And I remember the night her daughter was born because there was a temporary power outage during the storm. Her throat flexed. There was confusion with bassinets. 2 girls, both with dark hair, same weight. We corrected the labels in the morning. Or I thought we did. The room inhaled as one. My heart pounded against my ribs like fists on a locked door. Camilla's hands trembled. Years later, I requested the logs. The corrections are missing from the archive. I don't know if they were filed. The judge leaned forward. My mother's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse until her knuckles went white. She didn't look at me. She stared at the floor, as if the tiles might swallow the story whole. In the ringing quiet, a thought crawled up from the dark place where fear keeps its oldest boxes. What if, to save a house, a son, a story she preferred, my mother had found a truth she could live with, one where I did not belong? What if denying me was easier than facing a storm she started in 2018, or one a hospital started in 1988? Henrique's hand brushed my sleeve, a steadying touch. This helps us, he whispered. It opens discovery. Discovery. The word sounded like light prying under a door that had been painted shut for years. I looked at my mother. For the first time that day, she looked back, Her eyes flickered, not with pity or love, but with something rawer, older, fear, maybe, or the knowledge that stories, once unspooled, have a way of tying themselves around the ankles of those who throw them. The judge called a brief recess to review the nurse's affidavit. People stood, rustling, whispering. I remained seated, breath slow, spine upright. A window cracked open somewhere. A ribbon of warm air slid in, carrying city dust and the faint perfume of someone's cologne. I closed my eyes and felt, beneath the terror, the tiniest lift of the floor. Not safety, not yet, but a tilt toward the truth, and toward the girl who had been told to disappear. When the judge returned and the gavel struck again, the courtroom seemed to contract. The walls pressed closer, the murmurs dimmed into a suffocating silence. I sat at the defendant's table, my back rigid, my hands clenched on my lap, and tried to anchor myself in the smell of varnished wood and ink. But my mind was a storm. The nurse's testimony about the blackout, the confusion of bassinets in 1988, replayed like a broken reel in my head. For years, I thought betrayal was simple. My mother denying me for convenience, choosing my so-called brother over me. Now, a darker possibility crept in. What if she had convinced herself there was truth in her lie? What if, to her, I really was a stranger? The judge ordered the hospital logs to be released for independent review. His tone was measured, but I saw a flicker of interest in his eyes. Even he felt the crack in the certainty my mother had performed. Opposing counsel rose quickly, protesting about irrelevance, burden, time wasted. But the gavel fell with a sharp finality. Request granted. A ripple ran through the room, spectators whispering, reporters scribbling, my mother's face tightening into a mask that even makeup couldn't hide. She wasn't expecting the past to claw its way back into the light. I looked at her across the aisle. She kept her gaze fixed on the judge's bench, as if avoiding my eyes would erase me further. Her hands trembled in her lap, fingers twisting the rosary she had hidden in her purse. To everyone else, she looked like a frail old woman clinging to faith. But I knew those hands. They were the same hands that once braided my hair before school, the same hands that scolded me with a slap when I returned home late, the same hands that signed document after document, where I was the guarantor, the helper, the daughter who never asked why. And now, those same hands were trembling, because truth had brushed against the door she thought was sealed forever. Recess was called. People rose, chatter spilling into the corridor. My lawyer, Henrique, gathered the folders with his usual precision. He leaned close, whispering, "We've cracked something. Don't let her silence make you doubt." His cologne mixed with the smell of dust and coffee, a strangely grounding detail in the middle of my unraveling. I nodded, though inside my throat was burning. I stepped into the corridor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their glare harsh on the polished tiles. Reporters hovered, cameras flashing, their questions muffled into white noise. I pressed my back against the wall, letting the cool plaster steady me. My stomach churned. Memories returned uninvited, sharp and vivid. I was 12 again, clutching a school certificate with trembling hands. "First place in composition," it said. I ran home, eager to see pride on her face. She glanced at it, nodded, and said, "That's good. Now go peel the potatoes." At the time, I swallowed the disappointment, told myself love isn't always applause. But standing here now, I realized it had always been like this. She diminished me, cut me down, made me small, and I had accepted it because she was my mother. The corridor door creaked. She emerged with him, my so-called brother, her chosen son, wearing a blazer bought with the money that should have been ours. He guided her with a hand at her elbow, like a protector, like the heir she crowned long before today. For a moment, she hesitated when she saw me. Her mouth parted, and I thought, absurdly, that she might apologize. Instead, she whispered, low enough for only me to hear, "Leave it alone. This will destroy you." Her words sank into me like ice. I stared at her, unable to control the tremor in my voice. "You destroyed me the moment you pointed that finger." Her eyes darted away, Her spine stiffened, and just like that the mask returned. She walked off, heels clicking against the marble, each step a nail in the coffin of the daughter she had buried alive. My brother shot me a look, not pity, not anger, but cold triumph. He didn't need to say it. He had won her, and he believed he would win everything else too. I sank back onto the bench in the corridor. The janitor's mop squeaked over the tiles, the smell of disinfectant filling the air. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary building. And yet my world was anything but ordinary now. Henrique returned, offering me water. "She's playing a dangerous game," he said softly. "But games collapse when there are records. Numbers don't lie." His words reminded me of every transfer, every bank slip, every message where she asked for help. I thought of 2014, when she needed surgery and I wired her $3,200 without hesitation. 2017, when the landlord threatened eviction and I drained $9,000 from my savings. 2020, when she called me crying at midnight because she couldn't bury her sister without money, and I sent $4,600. 86,940 reais across 12 years. Proof of love carved into receipts. And now she dared call me an impostor. When the hearing resumed, I walked back inside with my head higher. The nurse had cracked the wall. The hospital records would widen the gap. And if the world still doubted me, I would fight with every scrap of evidence, every coin, every scar. My mother sat down across the aisle. She glanced at me, and for the briefest instant, fear flashed in her eyes. Not pity, not regret, fear. And that was enough to remind me. I was not the ghost she tried to make me. I was flesh, blood, memory, and truth. And I would not vanish quietly. The next morning, the city felt different, as if the streets themselves were holding their breath. I barely slept, my body tossing in a bed that felt too large, too cold. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her finger pointing at me, her voice echoing, "That woman is not my daughter." It didn't matter how many times I whispered to myself that I knew who I was. The accusation followed me like a shadow, staining every thought. When I arrived at the courthouse, the crowd had grown. Journalists lingered on the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward anyone willing to speak. I pulled my jacket tighter, trying to shield myself from their questions. "Is it true your mother denies you? Are you after money? Why would a mother say such a thing?" Their words pierced like daggers. I lowered my eyes, hurried inside, and let the heavy doors close behind me, shutting out their noise. Inside, the tension was thicker than the smell of old paper and sweat. Henrique sat beside me, adjusting his tie, his calm demeanor like an anchor in the storm. He laid out the documents on the table again: birth certificates, school records, bank transfers, photographs spanning 3 decades. Evidence of a life lived, of a bond nurtured, even if it was never celebrated. But would evidence matter when her voice was so absolute? The judge entered. The room rose, then settled into silence. My heart raced as the session began. First came the review of financial records. Henrique presented transfer after transfer, receipts from 2010 to 2022, each one proof of the support I had given her. The judge examined them with a furrowed brow, the opposing counsel shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Mrs. Silva," Henrique asked, his tone sharp yet respectful, "can you explain why you accepted nearly 90,000 reais over 12 years from the defendant if she is not your daughter?" The room hushed. My mother shifted in her seat, her hands trembling as they clutched the rosary. I thought she was helping out of kindness. I didn't want to embarrass her." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The judge leaned forward. "Are you saying you took these funds under false pretenses?" Her eyes darted to my brother in the gallery. He stared back, urging her silently. Finally, she straightened. "She insisted. I never asked." My stomach twisted. I remembered every phone call, every text begging for help. I wanted to leap to my feet, to shout the truth, but Henrique placed a calming hand on my arm. "We have the messages, Your Honor. Direct requests from Mrs. Silva, documented in writing." He laid them on the table. The words stared up at us, undeniable. "Filha, I need you. Can you send 300 for the light bill? Please, don't tell anyone. Just help me this once. My mother's handwriting, her voice captured in pixels and ink. For the first time, she faltered. Her eyes lowered, her mouth trembled. But then, with a deep breath, she raised her chin and said coldly, "Anyone can write those words. Anyone can forge messages. That woman has always been manipulative." The lie struck like a slap. Gasps filled the room. My chest burned with rage and sorrow. But I held still, my nails digging into my palms. Because I realized something in that moment. This wasn't about confusion or fear or even survival. This was about power. My mother wasn't just denying me. She was rewriting the past to erase me completely. The judge called a short recess. I stumbled into the hallway, leaning against the cold wall, my body trembling. The courthouse buzzed with voices, footsteps, echoes, but all I could hear was her last sentence. That woman has always been manipulative. Manipulative. After everything I had given, after every sacrifice, she painted me as the predator. I closed my eyes, and memories flooded in. The year 2002, she had lost her job at the textile factory. I was barely 14, but I started selling sweets at school, bringing home coins so she could buy rice. She praised me then, called me her little warrior. In 2009, when I skipped university parties to work weekends and help with rent, she said, "You're better than most daughters." And in 2018, when I signed those cursed documents at her request, she kissed my forehead and whispered, "I don't know what I would do without you." And now? Now she stood in a court of law and called me an impostor, a manipulator, a stranger. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not here. Not now. I straightened my back and whispered to myself, "You know who you are. You know what you've lived. No testimony can erase that." When I returned to the courtroom, Enrique gave me a look of steady resolve. The judge was ready to proceed. I sat down, my heart pounding, but my voice rising silently inside. I would not let her bury me. Not again. The sixth day of the trial felt like stepping into a theater where everyone already knew their roles, except me. I was the accused, the doubted, the shadow. As I walked into the courtroom, I felt every eye follow me, dissecting my face, my clothes, my posture, as if searching for the impostor my mother had named. The air was heavy with whispers. I caught fragments. How could a mother say that? Maybe there's something to it. Poor woman, being betrayed by her own child. They didn't know who the poor woman truly was. Enrique set his folder on the table, his movements precise, his jaw tense. "Today we present the hospital records," he murmured. His words steadied me, though my stomach knotted. The nurse's testimony had cracked open the door, but today the documents would decide whether I still existed in the eyes of the law. The judge entered, and the gavel struck. Silence spread like a shroud. A clerk wheeled in boxes of files, hospital logs from 1988, retrieved from dusty archives, bound with string. The sight of them sent a shiver down my spine. So many years reduced to folders and stamps, fragile papers carrying the weight of my identity. Enrique rose. "Your Honor, we request that the records concerning births on March 7, 1988, be examined in detail." The clerk opened the box, pulling out yellowed pages with fading ink. He flipped through them slowly, the silence broken only by the crackle of paper. My breath caught when he paused at the entry for my mother's name. The log confirmed a baby girl, weight 3 kilos, length 48 centimeters. But then, scribbled in the margin, nearly illegible, was a note. "Label confusion during blackout. Verified at 0620. Correction to be filed." My chest tightened. A correction to be filed. But where was it? The clerk searched, his brow furrowed. He shook his head. "No correction attached." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My mother's hands clutched her purse, her knuckles white. Enrique seized the moment. "Your Honor, this confirms what the witness testified. There was confusion. Records are incomplete. To deny my client her identity under these circumstances is to condemn her without proof." Opposing counsel jumped up, voice sharp. "Your Honor, this is speculation. The mother herself denies the connection. That should carry more weight than a scribble in an old ledger. But the judge was listening. His gaze lingered on the margin note, his expression unreadable. For the first time, the scales seemed to shift, however slightly. I sat frozen, my heart pounding in my ears. A part of me wanted to weep with relief. Proof. Finally proof that the truth wasn't as simple as my mother claimed. But another part of me trembled with fear. If there had been confusion that night in 1988, then who was I? Her daughter? Someone else's? My entire life hinged on a line scrawled in the dark during a storm 37 years ago. During recess, I stepped into the corridor, the voices of reporters buzzing louder than ever. "Is it true you weren't her child at birth?" one shouted. "Do you know who your real family is?" another asked. Their questions pierced deeper than knives because I had no answers. My identity, once solid, now felt like shifting sand under my feet. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes, and memories rose. Her hand holding mine at 7 years old when I had pneumonia. Her laughter when I danced clumsily at 15. Her tears when I graduated. Were those moments lies too? Or had love once existed before being replaced by betrayal and greed? Henrique found me there, his voice low but firm. "This helps us. Don't doubt yourself. You lived those years. No document can erase them." I nodded, though doubt gnawed at my insides. Because the cruel irony was this. The woman who gave me life, or claimed she did, was the one trying to erase it. And the paper trail that should have protected me only deepened the mystery. Back in the courtroom, the judge ordered further investigation. Hospital staff, old employees, anyone alive who had been there that night in 1988 would be summoned. The truth was no longer a question of testimony alone. It would be hunted in the fragile memories of people who might not even remember me. My mother sat stiffly, her lips pressed tight, her eyes darting toward my brother, who nodded at her like a general commanding a soldier. Their alliance was ironclad, but for the first time, cracks glimmered around the edges. As the gavel struck to close the day, I realized something profound. Even if the hospital confirmed the worst, even if I was not her biological daughter, it did not erase the years I had lived, the money I had given, the love I had poured. Blood might be questioned, but sacrifice was undeniable. And perhaps that was the core of my fight, not just to prove who I was by birth, but to prove who I had been by choice. The 7th day of testimony felt like a labyrinth with no exit. Every corridor led me deeper into questions I didn't want to face. The courtroom was colder than usual, or maybe it was just me, trembling beneath my jacket as if my bones had been hollowed out. I sat there, staring at the wooden grain of the defendant's table, tracing invisible lines with my fingertip, trying to anchor myself to something solid. The clerk began reading witness statements from retired hospital staff. Their words were shaky, like faded photographs pulled from a drawer after decades. One nurse remembered the storm that night, the lights flickering, the confusion in the maternity wing. Another swore she had heard about bassinets being misplaced. None could say with certainty whose baby was whose. Each statement added weight and yet no clarity. My heart rose and sank with every sentence until I felt seasick from the waves of hope and despair. I glanced at my mother. She sat upright, her rosary wound tight around her fingers, lips pressed into a thin line. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted nervously whenever the ledger was mentioned, whenever a witness faltered. For all her poise, I could see the tremor beneath. She was afraid, not of lies unraveling, but of truth spilling where she couldn't control it. My lawyer, Henrique, stood tall. He spoke with calm conviction, his words carrying across the room. "Your Honor, even if there was confusion at the hospital, even if records were flawed, there is irrefutable evidence of my client's role in Mrs. Silva's life. Financial records, written correspondence, years of lived history. To deny her now is not only unjust, it is cruel." Opposing counsel sneered. History is irrelevant if the bloodline was never there. Bloodline. The word stung like acid, as if love, sacrifice, loyalty, everything I had given were meaningless compared to strands of DNA. I wanted to scream that I was more than a bloodline, that being a daughter was not just biology, but years of carrying someone else's weight, of silencing your own needs for theirs. But the rules of court kept me mute. My voice lived only in my chest, beating against my ribs like a caged bird. During a recess, I stood alone in the corridor. Reporters swarmed again, their questions relentless. Do you believe you were switched at birth? Do you still claim this woman is your mother? I pushed through, my breath shallow, until I found a corner near a window where the sunlight spilled across the floor. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the warmth touch my face. I remembered being a little girl, sitting on our porch in the summer, sunlight painting my mother's hair gold as she hummed softly. Those moments had felt real. Were they? Or had I been a stand-in child, loved only until something better, or more convenient, came along? That night, back in my small apartment, I pulled out old photo albums. The plastic crackled as I flipped through pages of birthdays, Christmases, family barbecues. There I was, blowing out candles, hugging cousins, posing with a crooked smile in a graduation gown. My mother's face appeared in so many frames, smiling, sometimes proud, sometimes distant. If I was never her child, why keep me in these albums? Why document a stranger's milestones? And then I remembered the manipulation. How many times had she told me, "You owe me everything. Without me, you'd be nothing." She wielded motherhood like a weapon, extracting loyalty, obedience, money. Maybe it was never about love or biology. Maybe it was about control. And when I finally resisted, when I demanded truth, she found the cruelest way to punish me: erasure. The next day, the judge called for genetic testing. My heart stopped. A swab, a lab, a result on paper that could either vindicate me or sever me forever. Henrique leaned close, whispering, "We'll do it. Whatever the outcome, you have lived your truth. That cannot be erased." His words steadied me, but my stomach churned. Because I knew that once the test was done, there would be no turning back. My mother's lawyer protested, claiming it was unnecessary, invasive, humiliating. But the judge's gavel silenced him. If the foundation of this case is identity, then science will be heard. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. My mother's face turned pale, her eyes wide for the first time. She clutched her rosary tighter, whispering words I couldn't hear. And I realized she feared the test more than I did. Because truth, once written in DNA, could not be bent to her narrative. That night, lying awake in the dark, I whispered to myself, maybe blood doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is who I chose to be all these years. But deep inside, I knew the result would change everything. It could set me free, or it could shatter what was left of me. Either way, the countdown had begun. The morning of the test arrived with a sky the color of ash. I walked toward the courthouse as if toward an execution. The city moved around me, vendors opening their stalls, buses grinding to a stop, children in uniforms tugging at their parents' hands. But none of it touched me. My world was reduced to a swab, a vial, and a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to face. Inside, the air smelled of polish and sweat. A technician in a white coat stood at the side of the courtroom, sterile packets laid out on a tray. The judge explained the procedure in clipped tones. Both parties would provide DNA samples under supervision, and the results would be expedited. His words rolled over me, muffled, as if I were underwater. My mother sat across from me. She looked smaller than usual, her shoulders hunched, her rosary clutched so tight the beads pressed deep marks into her skin. For the first time since this nightmare began, she didn't meet my eyes. Fear draped over her like a veil. And I realized, this wasn't about shame. It wasn't about protecting herself. It was about exposure. She had built a fortress of lies, and this test was the storm that could tear it down. When the technician approached me, I opened my mouth, the cotton swab brushing against my cheek. Simple, painless, yet it felt like my entire existence had been scraped and sealed into a small tube. My hands trembled as I signed the form. My identity, reduced to barcodes and paperwork. Then it was her turn. My mother hesitated, just for a heartbeat. The room held its breath. Would she refuse? Would she collapse? But then she parted her lips, let the swab touch her, and quickly turned away, as if hiding from her own reflection. The samples were sealed, labeled, locked away. The judge declared that results would arrive in 3 days. 3 days that stretched before me like an endless desert. That night, back in my apartment, the silence was unbearable. I paced the floor, the shadows lengthening around me. Memories rose unbidden, sharper than ever. I remembered the winter of 1996, when we shared one blanket in the drafty house, her arms wrapped around me, whispering, "Don't worry, Fila, I'll keep you warm." I remembered 2003, when she screamed at me for failing to wash the dishes. Then minutes later stroked my hair and said, "I'm sorry. You know I love you." I remembered 2010, when I lent her nearly all my salary for rent, and she cried, calling me her savior. Were those moments real? Or had I been nothing more than a convenient stand-in, a child she could mold, use, discard? The days crawled. I barely ate, barely slept. Henrique called often, urging me to stay calm, to focus on the evidence we already had. "Whatever the test shows, your sacrifices are undeniable," he reminded me. But I couldn't quiet the storm inside. Because this was more than a case. It was the question of my very existence. On the 3rd day, the courtroom was packed. The judge held the envelope in his hand, the paper crisp, official, merciless. My breath came shallow, my heart pounding so hard I thought I would faint before he even opened it. My mother sat stiff, her rosary hidden in her purse now, her fingers twitching nervously on her lap. My brother avoided my eyes, staring at the floor. The judge broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper echoed louder than thunder. He unfolded the document, scanned it, then looked up. His face betrayed nothing. "The results of the DNA analysis confirm." My stomach twisted into knots. I gripped the edge of the table, my nails digging into the wood. Around me, the room leaned forward in collective breath. My life, balanced on the edge of a single sentence. A 99.8% probability of maternity between Mrs. Silva and the defendant. Gasps erupted. The words rang in my ears, sharp and undeniable. 99%. Mother and daughter. The ground steadied beneath me for the first time in months. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't of relief alone. They were of rage, of vindication, of grief for every moment stolen by her lies. I turned to look at her. Her face had gone pale, her lips parted in shock. For once, she couldn't hide behind denial. She couldn't twist truth into her weapon. Science had spoken. The judge struck the gavel for silence. "This court recognizes the biological relationship and will weigh this result heavily in the final judgment." I sat there, trembling, tears sliding down my cheeks. Not because I had won, but because the battle had shown me something even darker. My mother had known all along. She had carried me in her womb, raised me, taken my money, my loyalty, my love, and still, she had chosen to erase me. The truth had saved my name, but it could not restore the bond she had shattered with her finger, her voice, her betrayal. The room still buzzed with disbelief when the judge set the papers aside. People craned their necks, whispering to each other, the word 99.8% rolling from mouth to mouth like a wave. My body felt weak, my knees unsteady, yet I sat taller than ever. For months I had been treated like a shadow, an impostor in my own life. Now finally, the truth was stamped, signed, undeniable. But the victory tasted bitter. I turned to look at her, my mother. She sat frozen, her rosary beads slipping soundlessly from her lap. Her lips moved, barely forming words I couldn't hear. For the first time, she didn't look like a queen ruling from a throne of lies. She looked like an old woman caught in a net of her own making, struggling for air. And still, instead of relief, I felt only the crushing weight of everything she had stolen. Years of trust, thousands of riets, my very sense of self. The judge struck the gavel. "Order. This court will adjourn until tomorrow for closing arguments." His voice was calm, but the room erupted the moment he left. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. microphones thrust at me. How does it feel to be vindicated? Will you reconcile with your mother? Do you believe she lied deliberately? I couldn't answer. I pushed through the crowd, Enrique shielding me, his briefcase raised like armor. Outside, the air hit my face like a slap. The sun was too bright, the street too loud. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. Enrique guided me into a taxi. Inside, the silence suffocated. Finally, he spoke. You won, Maria. Do you understand? Whatever else happens, you proved who you are. I nodded slowly. I proved blood. But what about love? What about the years she denied me? My voice cracked. You can't win that back in court. That night, I wandered through my apartment like a stranger. The walls, lined with photo frames, seemed to mock me. Pictures of me and her, birthdays, holidays, smiles that now looked staged. I pulled one down. Christmas 1999. I was 11, holding a doll she had scraped money to buy. She smiled behind me, her hand on my shoulder. I traced her face with my finger, trying to reconcile that woman with the one who had stood in court and called me a stranger. Sleep didn't come. At dawn, I sat at my kitchen table, writing. I wrote everything. The sacrifices, the manipulation, the impossible requests, the lie in court, the DNA test. My pen shook, ink blotting the page, but I didn't stop. I had realized something in that sleepless night. If my own mother could erase me, then I needed to write myself back into existence. When morning came, I carried those pages with me to the courthouse. My daughters, my life's only pure gift, met me at the entrance. Their eyes were filled with both pain and pride. We're with you, my eldest whispered, squeezing my hand. I nearly collapsed in her arms. For so long I had feared that my silence would poison them. But now, standing by me, they gave me the strength to face what was coming. Inside, my mother avoided my gaze. Her lawyer shuffled papers nervously. The DNA result had gutted their strategy. Still, I knew her. She wouldn't admit defeat. She would twist, manipulate, search for another lie to cling to. Because if she admitted the truth, she'd have to admit everything. The theft, the favoritism, the cruelty. And that, I realized, she would never do. The judge called the session to order. Enrique stood, his voice steady, echoing across the room. He laid out the facts, the financial records, the written pleas for help, the photographs, and now the DNA test. This is not the story of a woman inventing ties where none existed. This is the story of a daughter erased by the very mother who should have protected her. It is not just unjust. It is inhumane. The words shook me to my core, because they were true. More than any verdict, I needed the world to know that what she had done wasn't just a lie. It was an act of cruelty. When her lawyer rose, he tried to recover, painting her as confused, frail, overwhelmed by the process. She never meant harm, he claimed, but his words rang hollow. The gallery shifted uncomfortably. Everyone had heard her voice when she pointed at me, steady and merciless. Everyone had seen the DNA results. No excuse could mask that. And then, to everyone's shock, the judge turned to her. Mrs. Silva, do you have anything you wish to say before we conclude? The room held its breath. She rose slowly, clutching the wooden railing for support. Her eyes swept the courtroom, then landed on me. My chest tightened. Was this the moment? Would she finally admit the truth? Her voice was soft, but it carried. I did what I thought was right. She was never what I wanted her to be, and I couldn't bear it anymore. Gasps filled the room. My body went cold. Never what she wanted me to be. Not daughter, not helper, not sacrifice. I had never been enough for her. And instead of facing her disappointment, she had chosen to erase me. I sat frozen, my tears finally spilling. The DNA had proved who I was, but her words proved who she was. And that truth was heavier than any verdict. The judge's gavel struck for the last time, and the case was formally closed. The verdict was clear. The DNA, the records, the testimony, all of it confirmed what I had always known in my bones. I was her daughter. Legally, biologically, undeniably. The court recognized it, stamped it into history, and in the eyes of the law, I had won. But as I sat there, surrounded by the echoes of voices fading from the chamber, I felt no triumph, only a hollow ache, because victory in court could not erase what had been said. It could not take back the image of her finger pointing at me, her voice slicing through the air with those words, "That woman is not my daughter." No stamp, no signature, no gavel could glue back together the bond she had shattered. When the crowd dispersed, I stayed behind, staring at the empty benches. Dust floated in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the high windows, tiny golden particles drifting in silence. I thought of the years I had carried her burdens, the nights I had worked myself to exhaustion, the money I had handed over without question. I thought of the birthdays where I waited for her to say she was proud of me, the moments I silenced my own dreams so she could live hers. And now all of it lay at my feet like broken glass. Outside, reporters swarmed again, but this time I did not answer. I walked through them like a ghost, their microphones grazing my arm, their cameras flashing. I kept moving, step after step, until I reached the quiet street beyond. My daughters waited there, their faces full of love and sorrow. When they embraced me, I finally let the tears come, not for the verdict, not for the years wasted, but for the child inside me who had spent her entire life begging for her mother's recognition and had received denial instead. That night, in my small apartment, I lit a candle and sat by the table with my notebook. The flame flickered, casting shadows across the walls, and I began to write again, not about the trial, not about the evidence, but about the truth of who I was. I wrote about the little girl who sold sweets to help her mother pay rent, about the young woman who gave up her dreams for loyalty, about the adult who poured thousands into keeping her mother afloat, only to be called a manipulator, and about the woman now, sitting alone, stronger than she had ever been, even with her heart in pieces. As the words filled the page, I realized something. The court had given me a verdict, but it was my voice that gave me freedom. For so long I let her silence define me, her manipulation dictate my worth. Now, my story was mine again. Days turned into weeks. My mother retreated from public view, her health faltering, her name whispered in town with pity and scandal. My brother still clung to her, but even he avoided my eyes now. I did not seek her out. I did not crave reconciliation. Some doors, once slammed shut, must remain closed. And yet, sometimes late at night, I caught myself remembering the warmth of her arms when I was small, the lullabies she hummed when fevers racked my body. I wondered if those moments had been real, or if they had always been tinged with the seeds of her cruelty. The answer no longer mattered. What mattered was the woman I had become in spite of it, because I had learned the hardest truth of all. Blood may define where you come from, but it does not define who you are. Sacrifice, loyalty, resilience, those were mine. She could deny me, erase me, twist the story, but she could never take away what I lived, what I gave, and what I survived. Now, when I pass a mirror, I no longer search for her face in mine. I see only myself, wounded, yes, but unbroken. My story is not one of erasure, but of emergence. I am not the impostor. I am the daughter who endured, the woman who rose from betrayal, the voice that will not be silenced again. And in the quiet of my home, as the candle burns low, I whisper to the child I once was, "You were always real. You were always enough. And no one, not even her, can take that away."